Today is the last day of symposium, and we are closing it with our roundtable discussion. We will be hosting conversation with all partner cells on how we work together. And first of all, I would like to present our partner cells today. Most of them you already had the chance to meet during the previous days of symposium as a moderators or hosts. So with us here today, we have Zdenka Badovinac in front of Moderna Galerija, Nikita from Times Museum in Guangzhou, Larys Frogier from Rockbund Art Museum in Shanghai, Robel Temesgen, artist based in Addis Ababa, Sinkneh Eshetu, landscape architect and writer, Aigerim Kapar from Artcom platform, and Dragan Stojmenovic from Public Library in Bor. Over the last years, cells are always represented by the same people that are participating in a round table discussion today. They are museum directors, chief curators, founders of the spaces, curators, and artists. As partner cells, among us who have stable internet connection, we meet every 2 weeks. We need the time to acknowledge that basic functionality is not the same for everyone, and to negotiate how to create a space within a project to embrace this unevenness and not recognize it as a deficit. Creating and nurturing that relational space over a year also directed us, partner cells, to respect the knowledge that we may not have had access to recognize it and build trust in other partner cells in the way we talk about it, to acknowledge urgencies as well as the knowledge situated within different cells that is still not part of our individual knowledge structures. For me, this is the point where spatial condition for multiplicity slowly emerges. The invitation to join the project as cells was sent to you, knowing that you could recognize certain potential within the relationship and possibly gain something out of it. That something is very different to each single cell. Each of us came with its own intention to unlearn, to become visible, to become invisible, to relate to an international community. What we all share is a discomfort at how the international has been performed through contemporary art practice and collective desire to create pathways for working and imagining otherwise. The natural position of cells and our pleasing instability redefine the notion of authority. It also opens up possibility of collaborative reflection and authorship, as well as the bliss of ignorance that in the presence of another mind is not so easy to achieve. This proposition over the year of working together opened up a number of not so easy to answer questions. How might we keep horizontality within the project among the partner cells? And how might we go beyond economic means within the project? Who is contributing financially and who is not? How the labor is valued? These very practical inquiries led to issues on how we find ways to work together across different localities, especially during the separation time. Is it possible to speak about solidarity across different contexts and on what terms and how we might go about it? Is it possible to slow down the process of production, affording artists and researchers and us the time and space to develop the idea of working together? How do we imagine and develop different working rituals within each other through this process? This inquiry has been deeply influenced by my own experience working in China and being embedded in that very context, taking critical inquiry of Belt and Road Initiative as a point of connection rather than separation, being convinced that BRR will trigger and possibly cultivate connection that will not be possible to channel and control to the mainstream narratives of the states, and that these gaps will enable more meaningful interaction that is process-oriented rather than outcome-driven, and especially in these uncertain times. Pandemic has changed drastically our context and make it even more relevant as we look at the complex geopolitical shift, recent vaccine distribution, constant waves of the pandemic around the world that we try to unpack in the year to come. Today's roundtable will not have a moderator, but it is a proposed moment to ask each other questions and to reflect on our modes of working and thinking together within the project. I would like to thank you again for your trust and maybe to invite you to start with invitation to share your personal but also institutional intentions within this journey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Biljana. This is Larys from the Rockbund Museum in Shanghai. I think the As You Go research project and the way to work together is extremely precious into our times. And what makes sense for me is also the concept of strangeness, as we are stranger to each other, and the way we can, of course, collectively learn about the different localities or larger pictures that we are experiencing today. And so this smaller scale of the cells is a concept that I think is very important to become a practice. So, and not only a concept to articulate. So that's how also I feel the As You Go is a strong process really to engage in the full sense and the project. And even if the pandemic is here, is the opportunity for us also to resonate according to our personal life, professional projects, and of course, intra and intercultural connections. So I'm very curious also to know from the other panelists what are your perceptions of such projects and engagement into the As You Go.
Thank you, Biljana. It has been really a great year, or even more, since we started to collaborate on this project. In Addis Ababa, we spoke for the first time about our commonalities between the partners in the project, coming from different regions, countries, traditions, cultures. And we named some of the commonalities as, of course, the most obvious one, the globalism, COVID, but at the same time, with some of us, socialism in the history, of course, is our common tradition. Then for some of us, the non-aligned movement, and then, of course, some of the countries that partners come from experienced colonialism and colonialism, the new colonialism, especially referring to the frame of Belt and Road Initiative, is present in a new form today. And Larys, you mentioned the foreigner experience as something, and I think this is probably a very important issue that we forgot to put on our list of commonalities. And now I remember the Slovene poet Jure Detela, who wrote, he was very active in the 70s, beginning of the 80s. He wrote actually that alienness is the soul bond that connects us. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really very important and very political also statement, and it deserves probably more attention also in our future discussions.
Yeah, I think the term is about strangeness or strangers. I would say is also a slight difference between foreigners, because foreigners is related to nationalities, and I'm very much interested also in the project about the concept of anomaly, or something that there has no name, or someone that is excluded from a system or a context. So what I like very much and very grateful to Biljana is to implement with us these questions that make us also not only tie to one locality, but also to ask different, to raise different challenges related to these intra connections between different localities. But I'm also interested in the anomaly that is not something negative for me, but a very constructive way of approaching or re-questioning a human experience, but also a non-human experience that is also part of our voyage or travel, especially in this pandemic context. So yeah, this dimension is to try to avoid any identification to a place and nations, but of course, considering the importance of questioning this context is very crucial.
Yes, totally. I think that this post-human frame, we didn't mention it in our discussion many times, although it was constantly present, at least via, the COVID, and how the small creature, influenced the whole world. But it is actually exactly the non-human aspect that that poet Detela referred to. He was very much writing about the animals and animality. So it is something that is alien, the animal, which is in us. So we have in us many different. Let's call it identity, although we know that this is the term that we are using very with distance today.
Sinkneh, because we are talking about the poem, would you like to maybe respond?
Maybe later. Let me warm up my thoughts as you discuss, and I will ask or comment on the poem. If I heard it correctly, I think the poet is saying it is the alien in us that connects us more across borders or something like that.
So he not only in us, the alienness is something that connects us all, or also non-human creatures. It's something that is the most universal, thing that connects us.
But that's very interesting when you think about, we met in February in Addis, and then most of our work happened online throughout the year. Like every 2 weeks we met, most of us. And I've been thinking that this, like a separation, also kind of brought us closer together in somehow as a community to work through the project till today. Somehow created a support structure for all of us within these times.
Yes.
I want to briefly respond to what we just kind of mentioned about the non-human, because I recently read an article by anthropologist Xiang Biao, and he mentioned or kind of emphasized what kind of human bodies more or less dehumanized during the pandemic, but that actually sustained the running of the world in China. So there are a lot of this delivery workers that work for internet applications on phones. So they deliver materials and also dinner, lunch to everybody's home, while of course the middle class stay at home and also feel safe and secure from the COVID. He also mentioned other kind of almost like a surge of mobility, like before a lockdown, I think of any of this big city, people either run out of the city or get away to the countryside. And now the kind of current reality of us separated because the borders are not open. So actually, I really appreciate, I think, the experience of joining As You Go project, which almost is a constant reminder of different temporalities and geographies, because I think one striking phenomenon of the pandemic is this coexistence of this information and also access of information. Since we are not able to move across border to really connect to each other, so joining this weekly or monthly based meeting is actually a very eye-opening window for us to still feel connected. But since disinformation is a corrective term of Trump's abusive usage of fake news, and it manifests a friction of information sphere, while the access of information means that we are constantly overwhelmed by white noise. So I'm actually wondering whether any of us today may share some personal experiences on this conundrum, I would say information conundrum, and how do we manage to counter disinformation and white noise while global realities are getting more divided and fractured. Maybe I would like Biljana to answer first.
Thank you, Nikita. I think for the project, like speaking from the project point of view, I think what we have been trying to do during the last little bit over a year is to really create a safe zone for all of us and a certain basic trust of working together. And I think for me, that was a very thin line to work and understand, although I'm friends with some of you, we are collaborators, some of you I knew for many years, some are new friends, to kind of create a safe zone. And I think for that, we stayed invisible for a very, very long time, really just working together, not really exposing ourselves. And I think that was, for me, extremely pressure, that we were all understanding importance of spending time together, which maybe even this separation gave it to us. If we were in a different kind of living condition, that may not be possible. But I think that kind of invisibility really helped us to create the connections over a very long period of time of working and learning from each other, because most of the knowledge that many of us bring into the project are not part of my knowledge structure or someone else's knowledge structure. And I think creating the space for the coexistence, it really takes the time, and it's a very kind of slow process for creating that. So so I think for me it kind of stays very important to understand and acknowledge importance of being visible and invisible. And I think this is something that kind of responds in a broader context of the news and fake news that we are all kind of being constantly fed, but also kind of giving voice at the moment where we have something to share, or coming together when we have the statement to put together as a group working together.
So one challenge I think for the project is, maybe I'm referencing to Chintiminha. How do we speak nearby, but also speak nearby with someone that is physically afar? And I think that really, in a way, that's what drives me to be part of the project from the very beginning, and also to connect. Most of the time, our research is based on the internet. When I mentioned about the access of information, it's like there is so much. You can always, even though in China there is a great firewall, but as intellectual or artist or curator, you can always access. But I also become more aware that the divide of the information sphere, which means like information about the project or also about enroll in a way, I think outside of China are mainly from English press or English media. From within China, it's actually very limited information about what's it's actually happening. And it's only through this network I gain a certain motivation to reach out to scholars or people, or also read kind of nonfiction essay or by journalists who can tell me a bit more about, I would say, different locales, and such as Central Asia. I've never been there, and also we plan to go, but we didn't manage to go. So that part of the history I'm completely ignorant of. So realizing my own ignorance and how we are actually, in a way, living in a global age, but still so divided, really is very revealing.
Yeah, I think it's a very important aspect of the project, because we are in the middle of a lot of noise and domination of meta discourses or this kind of fake news, and also ideological imposition in different contexts, makes also the project very precious because what we are trying to build is kind of in between, that is trying to, of course, to resist to these dominant systems, but not only to resist, is to try to create and to imagine what could be the different paths or roads. And this is also the subtitle of the project, that can be constructively shared, experience, and invented in a way, because we have also, I think, the responsibility to remake histories and also to imagine how from our own context there could be some resonance or frictions that can also make sense for such project. And I think this is also why this project is very meaningful, because it's to acknowledge, as Nikita was saying, our own ignorance about what is a neighborhood. And I think this is a very important challenge.
I think what Biljana mentioned before, spending time together, or physically or on Zoom, as mostly we were connected in last year, but this is a crucial crucial way how to fight against this white noise, whatever information. We are overwhelmed, fake news and all these things that creates and produce different subjectivities that we had before. So I think that it is the only way to to develop the affects and emotional ties, and solidarity is via spending time together. This is the crucial thing, you know, that we share time. This is the only way that we can create something better.
I just want to remind, like Dragan or Aigerim or Robel, if you would like to.
Yeah, I was actually about to jump in. Well, pretty much going to state the obvious, but when it comes to the reflections on As You Go, I think there are two aspects that I am really enjoying from this project, on how it has been started and how it's going. The first aspect would be the conversation that was just happening at the beginning, which talks about you know, being strange, allowing us to get to know each other, or to be familiar with, be it within the self or what we refer as the other. In that case, for me, let's say Bor project, for instance, to my understanding and to my knowledge, has been pretty much bold enough, visible enough, like monumental enough to be invisible, to be ignored, or not to be analyzed per se. Because when you have, you know, when you really want to hide something, you kind of put it really in a visible place. So it becomes quite an obvious matter and not to be navigated through. And for me, As You Go is this initiative that would be not so underground, but in a very slow-paced kind of attitude towards understanding what's going on, understanding what the impact would be, and the scale of the impact would be, and so on. And the second aspect is context. And when you look into this project, let's say one big nation is creating a network among other smaller nations in terms of economy and access. And if I would take Addis Ababa as an example, I have been having the interest to understand what's going on in terms of, let's say, particularly with Bor project, and yet there hasn't been much of a conversation that I placed even with my own fellow citizen like Sinkneh here. And what, you know, As You Go project is doing is giving a context so that we have the understanding from a broader perspective, not only from Addis Ababa or from my own personal take, but also, you know, what an environment where Zdenka is situated at is looking like, so that I would have a better analytical perspective and point to even have a grander narrative towards what's going on. So I think, you know, these two, you know, coming together to make us even, you know, in a smaller scale, to be able to know each other, to be able to understand the capacity of everyone around here, so that we kind of bring something bigger. But the first expectation that I had when we come together is actually to just be able to understand it, to analyze it, to know what's going on. And that could mean, you know, something bigger would come out, or, you know, a project would develop, another layer of a project would start. But also, even at this stage, I'm actually quite you know, happy that what's happening is already also, you know, a project, a process by end itself.
Pošto do sad nismo imali prilike da učestvujemo u tako velikom projektu, ovo je za nas praktično neko novo iskustvo i u tom smislu ja ga sagledavam, da kažem, onako klasično sa neke antropološke strane, da njime prelazimo neke simboličke granice, ali i one realne.
Because so far we didn't have actually the chance to be a part of such a big project. This is a completely new experience for us, and I would like to present it from anthropological view. And we, of course, have some symbolic and based on reality limits in relation to that.
Larys je spomenuo lokacije više puta. Zdenka i svi ostali ste spominjali tu globalnu mrežu, pa samim tim želim da se nadovežem na to zašto je ovaj projekat toliko važan za biblioteku i za grad u kojem se odvija.
Larys have mentioned several times the locations, and Zdenka and the others actually talked about the global network. And I would like to actually make reference to it, why this project is so important for the National Library of Bor, and actually for the town of Bor, that it actually, that is the place where I work.
Naime, Biljana je uspela da poveže ovim projektom, odnosno to se kaže proizvodnja novih lokacija, upravo prelaženjem tih realnih i simboličkih granica, tako što su istraživači u pravom smislu reči bili ovde i mi smo imali direktnih kontakta sa istraživačima, osim sa umetnicom iz Kine koja je pripremala rad priče između zidova. Tako da smo u pravom smislu reči prelazili te simboličke i realne granice. Tako da smo imali sreće da se upoznamo sa tim novim istraživačima i sa ljudima koji su u stvari stvarali priče o Boru, koje su važne za stvaranje te lokacije, bilo imaginarne koje je Robel spomenuo u smislu da će on razumeti sam Bor, bilo nas samih da razumevamo naš grad u tom smislu.
Actually, Biljana has connected the project like a kind of creation of new locations, taking into consideration the symbolic and the realistic borders that we have. We have had some researchers here, and we have worked with them, and we also made an experience with the art worker from China. She made a kind of work which was named A Story Between the Walls. And
Story from the Room. Stories from the Room.
Stories from the Room, okay. So all of those people actually worked here, despite those limits that we have, symbolic and realistic limits. The researchers and the people were talking about their stories about Bor. And Robel also mentioned Bor because he can now understand what is the system working in Bor. And we people from Bor also have our understanding of the town that we live in.
U tom smislu je jako važno spomenuti da se prilikom stvaranja tih novih lokacija stvaraju i nova susedstva. Tako da mi možemo jednako da vidimo, kako je i Robel sam rekao, šta se dešava u ostalim gradovima, odnosno na ostalim projektima, tako da su nam sad jako bliski životi ljudi, na primjer u Kazahstanu, i meni je izuzetno važan taj rad videti nevidljivo Alekseja Ulka, koji opisuje situaciju koja može da bude jako slična ovoj koju živimo mi danas u Boru.
It is really important to mention in relation to that, based on this project, we have the creation of new locations and new neighborhoods. And as Robel stated, we can now find a better understanding of not just our town, but also of the other towns and other projects. And this is something which actually has explained to us closely the life of the people, for example, from Kazakhstan. And also we can understand the work of Alexei Volk, how to see the unseeable And I think that there we can find the clue how to understand the usual situation of the people living in Bor.
Okvirno to bi bilo to za sada, a kasnije ću se uključiti u dalju diskusiju i nastaviti sa eventualno još nekim primjerima koji su nama važni.
In general, this is it from my side for the time being. Later on, I'm going to continue with the discussion with you, and maybe I'm going to present some of the examples that might be really important for us. Thank you.
Just to share my perspective on this as you go, I consider myself personally as a cosmopolitan or as a member of global human family for quite a long time because of religion and other inspirations. And I hope the future will bring unity of the global family in diversity. While maintaining the diversity, the unity will come. So this thought finds expression in different ways. For example, in religion, there are some activities that I'm engaged in globally, but in my profession in art, I'm less connected to the outside world. So this is probably my second project to be engaged in this kind of global art initiative. As personally, I try to understand the local through the lens of the global. For example, during the Derg time, the previous socialist government that I grew up in, there was dictatorship, and I try to understand that dictatorship from the nature of the global process that initiated this this local process. For example, socialism. How did it try to implement its ideals at the face of very old traditions, religious traditions, political traditions? It is so divergent from the previous ideologies. So it has to implement some form of dictatorship to try to have its ideology root in different communities. So this is just an example of how I try to understand that the local process is influenced by global processes. Or, for example, the dictatorship I just mentioned is not because of the personal or cultural evils that found their manifestations at those particular time in history, but because of the global influences. Even in my creative works, I try to understand this local or very personal issues from the perspective of global processes. So the actual process that I was participating for the last year or so in this As You Go project, there are some reservations that made me a little not significantly part of this process. One of the reasons is like this is a long drawn process, a bit too distant for me to feel like I'm part of this family that is trying to work on a single idea or project. This is because of many reasons. For example, the pandemic might be one of the reasons that prevents us from personally meeting one another, seeing each other, talking about, feeling like a family. And the other is technology, geography. The other is profession, for example, language, the jargons we use. and the interest areas that we are focusing on and our cultural differences. All this made me a little bit not to feel so part of this family, this as you go family. And the other reservation that I have is the lack of resources. For example, funding that prevented me from focusing on this project and devoting so much time that my project required to come up with something quality, something that I will be confident to share across borders. So these are my reservations. Otherwise, I appreciate this familyhood, and I hope it will build up in future to give me an opportunity, or my culture an opportunity, to express itself in the global big processes that I was trying to say.
Zdenka, you wanted to respond?
I just wanted to comment what Sinkneh said at the beginning, you know, the questions how the small can influence the big. So I remember from the socialist past how a very small Albania that didn't have connections with even with its neighbors like Yugoslavia had a very strong connection with very big China. So this is probably it. Of course, it happened because of the specific interests. And then, you know, the non-aligned movement created the opportunities for small and marginalized countries to have bigger influence. So, you know, the philosophy of it works against the economic dominancy of the very big, and not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of power. And so what it is today going on in terms of cultural and art world is again about the networks as you go. For example, it is with all its limits, of course, you know, there are, it's a low budget project, of course, but still it is important because it has a duration. I think its duration now a year, and who knows how long it will last further on. But it creates an opportunities that the spaces without much possibilities to connect with the bigger world can have a say. You know, it's an example of the art or cultural project that goes beyond the event culture. And we often speak about, you know, and are critical about the event as, you know, the part of this spectacular, the society of spectacle. So it is often that we are critical in Europe or in Western world about this kind of events, but still we are just continuing doing it because it's possible. Okay, COVID stopped it for a while, but who knows how it will go on. But there are there are spaces as Sinkneh, your country is, or many other spaces where you can't you can't make so many events. So, you know, so we learn here in this network about you know, the same concepts. So for example, the concept to go beyond event culture comes here from different needs. In Western world, we are critical about the events because we have too many of them. And in Ethiopia, for example, they can't create events. So there is no need, at least not the same need, to be critical about this dominant model of culture. And then, you know, there is an opportunity to ask ourselves what this dominancy mean? It means the model that belongs to one part of the world. And you know, at the end, how small can influence the virus from Wuhan proved that very small microorganisms can influence the world. So I think the small cultures can learn, at least from the nature also, some important lessons. You know, it is just important to have a chance to articulate them in a platform maybe like this one is.
I just want to respond in terms of the funding, because I think this is economy is always a very important aspect of the project, but we did discuss it on our meetings. I don't know how much you had the chance to be part of all of them, but I think it's an interesting experiment in on practicing horizontality, but also how the resources could be shared, because as we all know, the cells within the projects are locally very important agents for knowledge production, but when we are all together, we are very uneven. Like we having us from state museums to private museums to one person, so to individuals. So what we actually try to do throughout the year is to have like a core funds, and that fund has been distributed to the cells who have no possibility for funding structures of the project, like Artcom platform, like yourself. And these are the research funding seeds that are same for everyone, including the researchers in the board, for example. And then we made a special effort, and I think I'm very grateful for that the institution who had stable funding, that they could actually provide the funding for the other researchers within the project. So for example, Rockbund Art Museum supported Maria Glavaš, who is a researcher introduced by Moderna Galerija, but who is doing research in the Balkan region, including the Chen Liang, who is working with you, but it's Chinese anthropologist. And for us, it was very important to have a voice from the Chinese anthropologists within the research. So I think the whole, structure in terms of economy is also an experiment how maybe in the future those resources could be shared. For example, Times Museum, we just started the residency that is research on the ports. So I think it's also thinking how to work together horizontally, because some of the places that we are situated, they have no funding structures at all. So whether we can have funding that we have from different places be equally shared, and this is what we try to experiment within the researchers who have no possibilities for those kind of conditions. And this is something, I see it as a kind of aspect of disorganizing, or like thinking differently about working together. And I think this is, I guess, in terms of the pandemic, it's also very important to think about how we work together while separated, and how we support or establish supporting structures. But I think for the institution, this is very, very difficult structures, because they are bureaucratic structures. So it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to make these kind of steps.
And I totally agree that spending time together, it's the best way to do something better. It also works now for Artcom platform community. We find ourselves in limited physical space, even if we are in the same city or country. And we have to work online and try to stay together. for my personally, to be part of the As You Go, the roads under your feet towards new future inquiry, it's and participation in our common meetings. It was the way to stay connected with the world during the pandemic. And for Artcom platform, it's our first experience to participate in such a large scale and global initiative. We are joined the As You Go already after the start the pandemic, and we are the youngest of the cells, and before the pandemic, many artists, curators, and art came to Central Asia to do their data mining for researches and projects, but it's often not flowed into the collaboration. And I'm impressed with how Biljana involve and include the voices of Kazakhstan, Ethiopia, and other places into collaboration in this inquiry. And I think this is the good example how we can work together today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aigerim. And I think, how to say, also from what Biljana introduced from the project, we are talking about horizontality, but I'm also very much impressed by what Sinkneh is talking about, the impact of a very small locality on a bigger picture. And I think these are the challenges that I'm very interested in, because, how to say, horizontality somehow is also a bit of question for me, because when the more we go into the As You Go, the more we see the discrepancies or the inequalities or the oppressions. Is also, even we have a wish to be horizontal, there is also the danger to be flattened, you know. So unless we understand horizontality in the sense of horizon that open us a kind of very different perspectives and also limitations. So that's why I'm also very much interested in this. What Sinkneh tried to explain is this locality that is ignored or excluded can have a role to play. But also, I wish it can change the view on China, because everyone always talk about China as a big one, but I think there are so many people also trying to make a bit more complex that big picture to a smaller one. For example, at the museum, we are working on the Curator project that is based on a very small community in the area of the city. But for me, this research project related to forgotten stories can have a meaning also for all of us. And there's a kind of connection with the challenges of As You Go. So yeah, it's more how do we define this kind of equality or this horizontality today in the scope of As You Go.
I think something that when we discussed, when we had the first roundtable after half a year, something that I think Nikita was saying, that most of the art context within China has been very Western oriented. And I think whole like funding structure within most of these margin localities on the margin is somehow supported within especially the art and culture through the Western institutional system. So you don't really have that connections or possibility to reach out. So I think within most of you as a cells, and I think for me that was very important quality, there has been already there certain potential to think and rethink how international is produced and what international you're striving for and what tools you use to produce that connection. And I think for me, as a kind of beginning of working together, that was very precious quality of rethinking our own positions within the world, including our very small art world as well, as a practitioner. So I don't know if anyone wants to kind of respond to that.
I think it's difficult to avoid the influence of, you know, the different models of financing to the question of international. It's a fact that there are still mostly Western institutions, foundations, Western capital that support the projects as you go. Is something similar. It's the same case, you know, who finances it. But still, okay, we can also compare as you go with some other models of collaboration today. For example, in Moderna Galerija, we are involved in the Museum Confederation Internationale that tries to develop new ideas and new possibilities of international collaboration. Although this is the project on a much bigger scale and time frame than as you go. But still, you know, there are cultural collaboration of this kind that are, of course, supported mostly by the foundations, European Union, you know, so let's call it like a Western money. And this means that there is still the dominance of this Western model behind. But at the same time, I think what is different today is exactly the time dimension. You know, so we have some sort of continuation. So the Western cultural institutions or foundation, they just go on seemingly using different and new models, but only enforcing their dominant positions with the new. But at the same time, you know, the durational projects, which so as you go is one of them, bring something new. And this is exactly what I mentioned before when I was referring to Biljana's saying of importance of spending time together. So spending time together means that we share some social cultural experience. We go through similar, you know, problems and we try to solve them together. We feel each other better. We translate each other working together. You know, before, when there was more about the event culture than it's today, everything was translated via one language, the dominant language. And now this changed. So I think there are changes. So some things improved, and it's not the same as it was 30 years ago, let's say in times of Cold War, or, you know, in before these strong processes of globalization that opened the interest for new spaces. And of course, it was motivated by the international capital, but still there are some positive results of it. So the things are not black and white, and it's important to use that new models and to articulate it and to see where are our possibilities, you know, where we can find the tools to create the possibilities for more equal dialogue in a global level. How can we influence it, you know, as Sinkneh asked, how this small can contribute to exchange of ideas on global level.
Since Zdenka just mentioned the Cold War, can I tap into that question a little bit? Because in Biljana's introduction of the project, you mentioned New Cold War, I think, which hints at these two ideological camps that associated with China and with the US. But I also think most of our locales were considered peripheries of the historical Cold War, which center mostly around the fall of the Berlin Wall and also the disintegration of the Soviet Union. I'm wondering whether any of you may share some comparative thoughts on these two different Cold Wars, and also what we may do to spell off the ghost specter of Cold War rhetorics. Because that is one dominating discourse on a lot of mainstream media in China. And we think of the Times Museum as a kind of pedagogical platform, and that is something we constantly need to battle. And if that's the main rhetoric our young audience, even though they're mostly very educated, receive or perceive what the world is nowadays. I don't know, any of you, how do you, maybe it's less visible or less perceivable in other geographies, but that's been my personal, I would say, confusion and struggle.
Maybe I can respond first, and then whoever wants to follow up. I think for me, it's been extremely interesting time to look at basically the Belt and Road Initiative tapped into the interest zone of the former West, if you would like to say so. And I think what is my interest is to look at this, let's say, localities on margins and see whether these two powers' interests can bring certain new possibility of livelihood to these peripheries, and what these peripheries can gain out of, you know, that momentum. And this has been really interesting for me to follow. For example, I follow the Serbian situation very closely because, for example, because it's in between the geopolitics of big two powers of EU and China and Russia. Serbia has managed to vaccinate the highest number of population in whole Europe because of that, you know. So I think it's an extremely interesting process to look at how these like peripheries of margins trying to find the new strategies of survival in this momentum that I find actually precious, because they've been on a periphery for a very long time, you know. So I think what this conflict of big power interests can bring to those places, you know. And I think this is something that also part of this project tries to really unpack. And I think I just gave one example, but I'm sure there is many of them in every single local context. So I think this idea of geopolitics has like many different layers, at least for me.
I think for me that the terms of Cold War, I think is very relevant if we look back to the histories, but I think it is becoming more and more a question about how different main blocks are fighting, or I don't know, having some conflicts. So I understand that the project As You Go is trying to re-question such position or dominance to try to envision something that can be different than sometimes very simplistic opposition between areas and cultures. So I think, yeah, the concept of heterogeneity is also very important to raise, so that I mean, today is I would say is even not the war, it's just a pure violence sometimes. And so how do we work on this from our own context and perspective to raise the the inequalities or the exclusion, but I think the small voices are becoming more and more important to try to break out this kind of conceptual or geopolitical definition or partition of the world. Yeah.
Ovako, ja bih se pre svega nadovezao na Sinknehovo izlaganje i iskazao da je to jedna univerzalna potreba u koju se ogledam i ja, na primjer, ili društvu u kojem ja živim. Tako da su to ključne stvari kojima se teži, rekao bih, ovim projektom.
I would like to say, actually, in relation to the talk given by Sinkneh, that he has presented one universal need which is relatively present, and I also find that this is the need which actually is representative of me and the society where I live, and these are the key things actually that are important for this project.
To bi bile dve linije. Jedna je linija koju je spomenula Zdenka, druga linija je koju je spomenula Biljana. Radi se o horizontali, odnosno o prostornoj liniji, ali i vremenskoj.
We are talking about two lines, actually. One line of discussion was mentioned by Zdenka and the other by Biljana. We are talking about the horizontal connectivity, which is connecting both the venues and the time.
Ta vremenska linija, da bude onako slikovitije objašnjeno, može se ogledati na primjer u Boru jednim periodom koji je Branislav Jakovljević nazvao socijalistički barok.
In order to illustrate the connotation of the timeline, actually, I would like to talk about Bor in the period of time when Branislav Jakovljević has wrote a piece which is under the name of Socialist Baroque.
Nakon kojeg je usledio dug proces tranzicije.
After that, we have had a long time of transition process.
Zatim smo ušli u jedan oblik, u jedan period koji se može nazvati novom renesansom.
Then we have entered a new period, which can be actually titled a new renaissance.
Ta renesansa bi se ogledala u nekakvom šminkanju grada pred samu privatizaciju njegove glavne infrastrukture i industrije.
Actually, this type of renaissance would be presented in the best way, actually, as to call it a kind of makeup of the town before it has been subjected to the privatization of its infrastructure and industry.
Tako da na posledku sada dolazimo tim retrogradnim procesom, dakle od baroka, renesanse, privatizacijom iz tog socijalističkog perioda dolazimo u nekakvo novo feudalno doba.
So that actually, if we look at that on a retrograde level, we are coming from Baroque to Renaissance to the privatization of previously socialist companies to the new feudal age.
Odnosno neokolonijalno doba.
Or neo-colonialistic age.
U tom smislu, prostorno gledano, vrlo mi je blisko gledište koje svi mi imamo na različitim prostornim tačkama.
If we look at the space generally, then I can say that the outlook that we all have, regardless of the place where we live,
tako da je, žao mi je što se Aigerim nije uključila, ali u Uzbekistanu zaista te nevidljive stvari koje je Aleksej video su zaista jako slične onim koje možemo videti ovde u Boru.
And I actually find those things really similar to the situation in Bor. I really regret that Aigerim couldn't actually establish a decent network connection regarding the situation in Uzbekistan, but I know that Alexei had a chance actually to be there and to see everything. And I can see actually that the situation that they have there is quite similar to the situation which is now current in Bor.
U tom smislu je još jako važno da napomenem nekakvu poziciju nas istraživača koju možemo videti u jednom od izlaganja koje je bilo tokom simpozijuma, a to je koncepcija kargonauta.
I think that it is really relevant in relation to the position that we as researchers have to actually make reference to one of the speeches or talks that have been given during the symposium, which relates to the concept of cargonauts.
Tako da možemo se ogledati u toj ulozi logističkih radnika.
And I think that we can reflect ourselves also in playing the role of the people dealing in logistics.
Koji učestvuju u stvaranju tih novih lokacija i tog novog susedstva.
And those are the people actually who are actively participating in the creation of the new locations and the new neighborhood.
Eto, toliko. Hvala vam. Thank you.
That's all from me. Thank you.
So thank you all for the inspiring conversation. And now we're going to open for questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, please type in on Facebook, and we will read the questions to the participants of the panel. Thank you very much for the conversation one more time. And I think the audience had a chance to a little bit understand how we work together and what are our thinking behind. So we're happy to receive any questions or comments or further thoughts after hearing us sharing some of our ideas of working and being together. So please, you can type the questions on eFlux or Facebook of Moderna Galerija or what should Curating Do. We are here to try to answer them. while we are maybe waiting, do you think that we somehow through our conversation try to cover some of the core issues that we try to kind of work through and that we are still kind of trying to work throughout this year as well? Or is there anything that maybe we could also add while we are waiting for some questions from our distance listeners?
There are always questions and issues never covered till the end. Maybe we can, of course, say what we learned from each other. This is also important aspect of such a long-term collaboration. I think that as for me, the very important experience was the visit to Addis Ababa, because it is completely different world, and I was also impressed how culture and art work in such modest condition. It's not only about, we hear in Ljubljana and everywhere in the Western world, we are always complaining, not enough money, the policy, the ministries, the art market, whatever. But then you see, how all these aspects are, of course, important, and we have to continue criticizing all the, the conditions that we are involved. But at the same time, I think it's important to keep in mind, that the art and our work, it's a meaning of our life also. It's something that gives us energy, and that we can use the tools we have even in the most serious circumstances, which are not, of course, only related to the economic aspects, but also to the political aspects, which is important for us at the moment in Slovenia.
Do we have any questions yet or reflections from the listeners?
I have a question to us. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So when I listen back to our exchange, I can remember some keywords like commonalities, horizontality, and I would like to, these are interesting practices and concepts that I find quite relevant to what we are developing. This is my first question. How do we define today horizontality? And how do we define commonalities that is not part of a political system? And how do we, most important, practice these commonalities? That is an important question also for the future development of As You Go. And then, I think it relates to, commonalities, it relates to social structures or ideological systems. And horizontality for me is also a very academic, sometimes dogmatic concept that is far from some of the realities that we are going through. So yeah, I'm very curious because we are using a lot of concepts, but how do we re-question this concept as a practice?
May I? I see both terms connected, of course. I can't think about the common or commonality beyond horizontality. I think this is a condition, you know, because we talk about, for example, we talk about the Museum of the Common. This is a term that we often use also in our Confederation Internationale. When we use it, we think about the collaboration with the agencies which are not necessarily from the institutions, or we are not necessarily experts, or, you know, are not people that we work with on a daily basis. So when we think and talk about the horizontality, we talk about artists, we talk about activists, we talk about marginalized groups of people that we somehow create the platforms in our institutions for. So there are different aspects of collaboration which are important to do today, and through the horizontal collaboration we can create the common, and we can also share the common, you know, this is important. And I see both of the concepts more as the verbs than the nouns. It is more about, you know, common and horizontality in becoming, let's say. It's something that we practice through duration. That's why these projects, as you go, and other projects that were mentioned during our conversations are so important, because they are about the different understanding of time. You know, before I was talking about, you know, importance to go the concept of the event culture. So the concept of the event culture is related to everything what is contradictory to commonality and horizontality.
Yeah, because, yeah, I fully understand what you are saying, Zdenka, and I think it's a very crucial challenge. It's just that sometimes I think I don't feel very horizontal, actually. And if you say you are not horizontal, people think you are vertical. But no, sometimes I feel diagonal. Sometimes I feel upside down. And I like also the image of the birds flying in the sky is always about distancing, which is a keyword today, is how do they come closer, or they connect, or they go a bit far away. So is this kind of maybe subtle, yeah, way of becoming a bit more complex related to this horizontality, because I think it's important for the As You Go, as we discussed during this panel discussion. That is my feeling, because otherwise it's become like, again, a new concept, you know.
but this changing perspective is exactly what is very important here. You know, sometimes we think that only the experts are like vertical, you know, that there is this vertical relation, you know, that comes from the top. But we are the same people. We are in different roles through our professional lives. You know, sometimes we learn from people who are not the experts, you know, so or share things with through different platforms that are normally meant to be the platforms of culture or art, you know. So it is very complex question, actually, how the perspective is changing. You know, who is teacher and who is pupil, and you know, who is addressed to contribute the knowledge, who is producer of the knowledge. These things changed a lot.
Can I just read one question from the audience? And I think will be interesting, actually, that each cell from your own perspective answer to this question. And the question is, I don't have a name, I apologize, who sent this question, but does the Belt and Road Initiative itself know what you are doing? In what way do you involve them?
Can I quickly respond? Because this
yes, it's a very relevant for the Chinese context. Yeah, maybe Nikita, you can start.
An ontology, ontological kind of existence, right? But in a way, from what I kind of learn, especially from those people who are in the field, I would say anthropologists or kind of researchers, it's, I don't think it's completely conscious of some of this global influences, like maybe I recently listened to a conversation like Anna Singh talk about her website, Faro Atlas, that some of these factors, of course, are or elements or what we think of infrastructure, because a lot of the research subject in our project is related to infrastructure, were constructed or created by human beings, but we are far away from, well, really be aware of what are the real consequences of this infrastructure. So maybe it's, I think it's also maybe poetic to think of our, in a way, precarious infrastructure, lack of funding, but also in this very particular moment that maybe we can build some infrastructure that have a longer term of maybe feedback or circle of ideas or network that will kind of go beyond our own control. So yeah. So of course, to answer that, we didn't engage the BRI in a way. It's almost like a mysterious existence, even for a Chinese perspective. A myth building, but it's a narrative there.
Larys, would you like to maybe respond from your context?
Yeah, I fully agree with Nikita. There is a narrative somewhere, but it's not easy from the context here to catch it, because before it was like a huge public discourse. Now is forbidden to talk about. And I think from our different contexts, we need to make a lot of research. So when we started the project As You Go, I also dive into a lot of research to know how in the daily life of the people, rather than the system of BRA, how the people are affected by this, or how the transformation of the architecture is engaging the transformation of the city, the transformation of the tourism, the transformation of daily acts. This was more the most important and valuable for me, rather than to understand what is the system of BRA. And if we need to involve someone or to engage with this, I think it's very important we keep safe, to be on the side, to quote Drinking Minha, is also how do you learn to talk besides, or avoiding to talk on behalf of, which is, I think, something that is extremely relevant into our project. And I don't want to be dependent on this. And I think we are already very far away from that. So it's a bit complex because it's the kind of framework that we are trying to open and to go beyond. So I think this is the challenge for me.
Sinkneh, would you like to maybe respond in relation to context of Addis and especially the project that you have been working on? We cannot hear you. You are muted. Can you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
I think one of our objectives is to try to engage authorities at different levels. And this could be the public and the municipality, even at a bigger level, like because our project is about the project of the Prime Minister, we will try to find out a way to reach out to these authorities. And through this process, I think we might have the opportunity to engage people who might be related to the Belt and Road Initiative. In our interviews, in our visits, we have made informal interviews with the Chinese designer who did the garden design in the Friendship Park. So these are just the beginning of the long process we are in. So in future, I hope we will have some opportunities to engage and to give maybe as a feedback to these people working on the project itself. Generally, having answered this question, maybe just to share my comments on the ideas raised earlier, like the horizontality and the commonality. I was disconnected, so I'm not sure how much is talked on that subject. But what interests me in this aspect is the commonality that comes not as a result of the big projects that we are referring to, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative, socialism or something. These are big projects beyond us, but the commonality that comes as a byproduct or maybe parallel to these projects. For example, during socialism, there were lots of cultural exchanges from Russia and from, like, for example, literatures were translated, lots of literatures, for example, Chingiz Aytmatov and many others. So this influenced our literature directly and indirectly. So we have some commonalities that we can explore in future, going back, not only the present, also at this time of economic interaction with the Chinese, there are some byproduct kind of interactions, like cultural exchanges. For example, there are Confucius Institute here, there are translation works going on, literature exchanges, cultural exchanges, art, and other forms of exchange. So this will give us the opportunity to explore our commonality beyond the main big project that we don't have direct access to, or that may not involve us as artists or as public. The other things are our responses, the public, how the public responds to these big forces or processes happening. For example, in Ethiopia, there are lots of jokes about the Chinese products, the Chinese itself. There are lots of like urban, I don't know, metaphors coming out. So we can explore this, like how does the public respond to these big forces coming to it? And we can collect and, you know, voice these unheard of voices, for example, jokes about Chinese products, so this kind of thing. So there are many common things we may explore in future, and I hope this As You Go project will continue to engage more people and more aspects than this major project we are referring to, the Belt and Road Initiative in future.
Aigerim, would you like to maybe respond in relation to the question sent?
Yeah, thank you.
Dragan? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Biljana. Yeah, we are also far away from BRI initiative, as also from our state program, Zhou, which is connected with this international initiative. And we are artist community, but we have plans to engage other state programs, which is directly related to our project, Secrets of Balkhash, and also the local communities who are living there. So.
Dragan, would you like to respond in relation to Bor, maybe? Bi ti hteo da odgovoriš što se tiče Bora?
No, I don't have a comment.
Okay. Okay. I think we don't have more questions. I would like to thank you again for an amazing year. I learned so much from all of you. And thank you all for watching us and listening us. For us, we will continue learn how to work together. So please follow our online journal of the project, where we share things that are going public, but I think throughout 2021, there will be a number of public moments within the local context that the project is situated. So continue to follow our work, and stay healthy and stay safe, all of you. And thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Biljana.
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.